Mr. Lewis. That's encouraging that you are supportive of that effort. We have an incredible U.S. House member by the name of Melanie Stansberry. She used to work over here in the Senate, and the good people of New Mexico saw that expertise, and now she's in the House. But she really was the brain trust behind some of this with the work she did on similar issues in the Senate. So I appreciate that. And across the West, I'm glad to hear across the country right now there's more and more attention to the drought conditions that we're all experiencing. I myself, I'm fourth generation on a small farm. Now, some people may refer to what we do on a few acres as hobby farming. To us, it's self-sustenance. And while we eat what comes out of that ground, so do animals. So whether it's sheep or cattle or others that may be grazing on hay or that alfalfa that we're baling, it's all important as well. And as we're looking at those impacts, and Dr. Schultz, in New Mexico, like in Colorado, and I think Mr. Mueller mentioned this as well, our water comes from those watersheds, from snowmelt, and from accumulation. And like southern Colorado and New Mexico, they're all irrigation ditchways. And some people, may chuckle at what we do, but centuries ago, our ancestors saw right to dig 3 feet across, 3 feet down, and then they put these head gates. We call them compuertas. It's the Spanish name for a door, but head gate. And then we manage the water flow. In good years, everyone has more crop production, and in bad years, everyone's fighting. And you always have to walk up that ditch, and oftentimes it's with a shovel in your hand because you go look to see who took your water, and you have words with one another. But then the water gets flowing again. So it's always positive that way. But whether it's centuries old or we look at irrigation structures that have been constructed in conjunction with the United States of America within USDA, private entities that have taken these over and doing that work, it's also important. And last week I was visiting some areas of New Mexico where we have the largest fire on record now. It was started by a prescribed burn by the Forest Service within the USDA. But nonetheless, I'm very concerned about what dry conditions mean and lower water yields on the front end, and what that sometimes can lead to with beetles and other invasive species. But I'm much more concerned, at least during this time in New Mexico, with what good water is going to mean for us. Good water is going to mean bad water conditions, because that fire burned so hot. We've got ash 6 to 12 inches deep. We have trees that are going to come down. They're going to clog up the rivers. That ash is going to go into waterways and culverts. And some of these towns, that 90% of the water that is for drinking water in these communities, they're not able to touch it. And so, Dr. Schultz, can you touch on that a little bit as well with, fire and water, good conditions before or bad conditions, what that means to, and then on the back end, what that could yield to, and how we need to be thoughtful about conditions before and conditions after what could be caused with the fire?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Luján, for that question. And I'm certainly very cognizant of the intense fires you're facing in your state right now. And my heart goes out to your state and people who are dealing with that, and it's going to be an issue for a long time to come. I mean, I live in the footprint of the Cameron Peak fire, which I think was the largest fire in state history in Colorado, and it's had an enormous impact on our watershed, and I've watched that myself because the ash and water flows are very obviously impacted post-fire. And so I think one of the things we should think about is how we can improve our post-fire recovery funding and strategies, and I think that would be an area for emphasis for the Farm Bill, and something that we're going to be working on this summer is trying to understand specifically what people are needing and where they're running into challenges so we can help inform this committee on those issues. The other thing that I understand is that a lot of communities don't have backup water supplies, and so sometimes they have to, we have seen some communities where they switch to a backup water supply, but other communities are not going to have that option, and they're just one fire away from having their water supply essentially shut down. And we've also seen tremendous impacts to water infrastructure. So for example, I think after the Hayman fire in Colorado, estimates were that the impacts to water supplies for cities around Denver were over $30 million because of those sediment flows into the water infrastructure. So there's the impacts of the debris actually into the system, the toxicity of the water, and then the impacts to the infrastructure itself, which can be hugely important to clean up. So I think that all leads to the need to do more to limit these kinds of catastrophic fires, and also just recognize that they are going to be a bigger part of our future, and we're going to have to figure out how to have some nimbleness with our water infrastructure, with our water supply, and also have more focus on our post-fire recovery for communities.
Appreciate that, Dr. Schultz. And Mr. Chairman, since my time is out, there's two other issues that I wanted to raise, but it's more to get the attention of the committee staff as well as we're all working in these areas as well. And it carries off from what Mr. Braun was talking about with the invasive species with plants and weeds and things of that nature. In New Mexico and in southern Colorado, it's salt cedar in our waterways, and then we have these elms that, if we could just figure out how to get fruit growing out of them, we'd solve a lot of challenges. But these things spout up like crazy, and they drink a ton of water. But especially these smaller communities, they don't have the financial means to take those things down. It gets expensive. So to the extent that as we're looking at conservation and drought mitigation, that we try to plus that up, and that we look at smaller areas maybe where those local governments don't have the means to be able to get that done. And then the last thing that I'll say on conservation is, well, we need to be doing more in these specific areas with some of these earthen waterways, like Mr. Mueller just talked about. That's what recharges wells and keeps good trees from falling, that everyone's growing out that way as well. So as we find that balance, as we're working with lining and things of that nature, but that we understand those ecosystems that exist, or drinking water in many of these communities, which would turn into ghost towns if they didn't have water and there's no other way to get it to them. So just so that we're thinking about both of those. And I thanks everyone for the time, and thanks for the hearing, Mr. Chairman.
And I also want to say,